It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Joining me on the show today is Ken Thoreson, actually returning to the show for the second time. He's the president of Acumen Management Group and author of several books on sales, sales management, hiring, personal development. Ken, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Andy, it's great to hear your voice, and I'm excited to be able to be asked back for a second time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had such a good time the first time. I thought we had to do it again. And maybe just take a minute, if people maybe who didn't have an opportunity to listen to the first episode, introduce yourself a little bit more fully, what you do and who you do it to.
Well, Acumen Management started 19 years ago, and the primary focus when it started was to really work on the weak link of most organizations, and that tends to be sales management, sales leadership in that role. So we've dedicated ourselves with workshops, blogs, books around how to improve the sales manager, from leading an organization to sales compensation planning to recruiting and hiring a high-performance team. And my latest book is called Slammed for the First-Time Sales Manager. So we're really involved in helping that role. We also provide keynote programs at many sales conferences.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You talk about your most recent book, Slammed, and it's a topic that there has been sort of this influx of books over the last year or so about sales managers. I mean, you've got Dave Brock just came out with his Sales Manager Survival Guide. You've got Slammed, Mike Weinberg with his Sales Management Simplified, all sort of geared for, in large part, for that new sales manager. So what were you seeing that said, okay, this is really a need that needs to be addressed?
Well, after seeing hundreds of these people throughout the world on what happens, and I get called into a situation and the sales manager that they'd hired is not working as well as they want. So they had me come in and diagnose. And generally what we saw was that they were promoted from a salesperson's role without with any kind of management training, let alone sales management training. And what they ended up doing was wanting to serve the salespeople, solve problems. And it's a classic role of the sales manager having to serve salespeople, help achieve revenue, but they're a middle manager because they have to interface with their peer managers and also report to the president or board of directors. So all of a sudden they have 100 different things going on, and their to-do list gets 2.5 pages long, and they just can't get anything done, and they get slammed after about 4 months to 6 months because they're spinning their wheels. They haven't set priorities. They haven't understood leadership versus management. They haven't understand sales management systems to make and leverage their time. And they really fail to plan their own business plan and sales plan for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so they're on a treadmill. And that's why a lot of people fail, and why we've frankly been highly successful over the last 19 years of addressing that issue. As a vice president of sales, I saw that happen. And that's one of the reasons I started my company. There's a lot of people providing quality sales training, which is great. But there was not a focus around really training that sales manager on the 5 styles of leadership, the 5 styles of management, how to coach, how to run a Monday morning sales meeting, how to build a quarterly sales training program for their salespeople. So all of the systems were missing in a lot of organizations.
All right. So if you had to summarize, what is the single sort of biggest challenge facing a sales manager today? What is it?
Their inability to build a formula or a process. In order to replicate and be successful, a new sales manager or any sales manager has to think about, how do I make life easy for my salespeople, but also for myself, so I can focus on execution. My tagline for my company is building organizations through the execution of strategic sales management. I like to use the example of Subway sandwich. When you walk into Subway, they go 6 inch or 12. And then they walk you through that production line of putting on the spinach, the cheese, the sauce, the meat, and sell you a chocolate chip cookie at the end. They are a fine-tuned organization focused on execution. Most sales organizations do not have all those pieces in place, or the salespeople are not well enough trained to have a process.
So this is not a new problem. This is the ever been problem for sales managers.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new in any of that. It's a matter of the sales manager not being exposed to other organizations who run really well because they've grown up in an organization that this is how we do it, and they haven't been exposed to how professional sales managers do sales planning, how they manage and hold accountable their salespeople, what kind of discipline they need to build. I use a quote from happened to be the coach from the University of Tennessee, who said most players do not show up and perform at 100 to 110% every day. It's the coach's job to build the right level of intensity. So there's the emotional side of sales management as well as the process side of sales management.
Let's talk about the emotional side for a second before I hop into our main topic of conversation. Is what's and I certainly understand in football you come to practice, there's a certain amount of rah-rah and so on. What's the sales manager do to set the right emotional tone for the team?
Interesting. I spoke about this recently at a keynote event up in Chicago, and what we were really talking about is sales manager making sure that they can, and I use the phrase, align the soul of the individual with the goal of the corporation. And what I mean by that is to make sure that there's a belief system that the salespeople believe in the company, believe in the product or service, and believe in how they can impact their clients through that. So there's issues around how do I build belief? How do I build excitement? And the classic line is if it isn't fun, it isn't selling. Too many times sales managers, especially new ones, get caught up in tracking activity, trying to build something and run around all day trying to close deals. Well, it's not the sales manager's job to make quota, it's the salesperson's job. The sales manager's job is to hire the right people, create the energy, intensity, emotional belief, and have them well trained to be able to execute on the business plan. And so the sales manager needs to think about what I call tribal stories, where they tell all the salespeople about how good the company is, when we saved our client, when we did this issue. I like to bring in once a quarter, I recommend that you bring in a client to a sales meeting or a company meeting with all the employees, depending on the size of the organization, and have that client testify to how good the product or service was from the company. So people get to hear it, believe it, and be able to energize with it. Most high-performing salespeople leave organizations when they lose faith in the organization. Mm-hmm. And too many times sales managers forget that I've got to make sure it's fun, I got to create the right level of emotion and belief, and I got to make sure there's high levels of energy. And you don't do that through taking a whip out and being very factory-oriented. You've got to get people wanting to come to work, having the right intensity to work opportunities smarter, and to be able to excel and do the things that most salespeople don't do.
Okay. Well, that's a great segue into one of the things I wanted to speak with you about, which is sales hiring. I mean, you've written a book on this called Your Sales Management Guru's Guide to Recruiting High-Performance Sales Teams. So why is hiring such a difficult task for sales managers to get right?
Lots of reasons, and that's why I wrote the book. But the first element is they do not consider recruiting part of their marketing plan. So we like to suggest with our clients that they create a sales recruiting marketing plan. What does that mean? Well, just like any marketing plan, it's diversified. I want to maybe be on the internet. I may be we like to suggest, as boring, is to put an ad in your local business section, display ad every 60 days, whether you're hiring or not. The key issue is that generally the high-performing salespeople may not be looking when you want to hire somebody. So you've got to build a 12-month campaign always to be out in front of your audience. When you go to a trade show, you recruit at the trade show. You don't work the booth if you're the sales manager. You're looking around looking for talent at that trade show. If you're interviewing people on a day-to-day basis, or you're running an ad on a website bulletin board, you have to be able to look and see what happens in all those areas. So first of all, quantity and activity from a marketing campaign is critical. Number two, it's hard because they haven't prepared a sales presentation as to why you want to come to my company. In college football, recruiting is a major issue. And if you have a top 10 recruiting class, you're going to get the top 10 4-star and 5-star football players. Same idea that they have to have a good sales presentation to be able to get those guys there. And then it gets back into hiring and building a sales process or sales interviewing process.
Well, I think that one of the things you bring out in your book relatively early on in it is that, and I see this all the time with companies, is hiring managers, they take the path of least resistance to hiring people. And it's, not looking at strategic, you talk about this term you use, downward hiring, which I think is really, to me, sort of the critical thing that I see happen time and time again. And maybe why don't you explain what the downward hiring is in your perspective and how you remedy that?
It's really a formula we talk about is if you're really good, what I call A's, hire A's people. But if you're average and you're a B performer from an interviewer perspective, you hire C's. And if you're a C and not very good, you hire F's. And so it's very important that you improve your skills. For example, in the interviewing process, generally in the first 3 to 4 minutes, you make up your mind whether you like the person or you don't. And therefore, you start to ask questions differently. You assume issues. You have to remain skeptical in the interviewing process. Number two, my rule is for every one salesperson you hire, you have to interview 5 people. And you see people get lazy. They hire somebody, they see somebody, they have a hole, I got to fill it, they fill it, and 8 months later they shake their head and said, why did I hire Andy?
Well, they never said that about Andy, but yeah, I've written about this. I use a baseball analogy. I say, when it comes to hiring and interviewing is you never swing at the first pitch.
Good point. And here's a number that a lot of people don't know, that if you mishire somebody, it costs you generally 4 times what you paid that person during their stay. And I have a whole formula that I found. It's a research item, but it's really expensive for that mishire in your time, lost sales, training costs, everything thrown into that. So there are some statistics around it. And you also want to make sure that you have at least 3 people in your company interview each candidate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't even take a step back because you have a fairly lengthy description about how to write a job description and job specifications, which I think is where a lot of the problem starts for sales managers, because if they're shortcutting that as part of the process, obviously they're going to shortcut other things. But it seems to me like one of the real issues in sales hiring these days is lack of alignment with the needs of the customer, meaning that when people put together job descriptions, they put together ads or marketing materials and so on, is we're still relying on these outdated, stereotyped characteristics of behaviors. We're a hunter, closer, the aggressive types, and these outgoing, which have nothing to do with the performance of the job.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really, that's why I actually added the job description idea, or what I call salesperson expectations, so that there's a clear understanding of what you want that salesperson to do, what type of clients or prospects are they calling on, what they need to have from a previous work experience, what they need from a style perspective. For example, in a company I ran from a sales management perspective, we were a vertically aligned company. We had people who sold into credit unions. We had people who sold medical solutions and people who sold construction and distribution kind of elements. In our analysis, the top 10 performing salespeople in each of those markets had a different personality style, a different sales style. But we could see a commonality between the top 10 in each of those segments. So as we started looking for more salespeople in those individual segments, we had a profile of what the potential ideal salesperson would be. So one of the things I talk about in the book is coming up with the 5 previous work experiences that are going to be ideal for that role, and the 5, as you said, kind of characteristics of that person, not hunter or closer, but what kinds of personality, what kind of relationships, What kind of style are they? And with those 10 words fit into what I call the interview scorecard.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into the scorecard here in a second. But this idea of, I agree, is the characteristics should be much more about, empathetic, problem solver, responsive, curious, rather than, like I said, I urge managers listening to this, get rid of, delete the word hunter from your vocabulary. It doesn't have a role.
I agree with you, and I think it's critical, and that's why you have to be very careful as a sales manager as to what sales assessment profiles, tests that you use. Some are certainly some are personality style, which give you some idea, but there are some really good tools out there that talk about can this person sell? And is this the type of person and profile we really want based upon some of the things you're talking about? I don't sell them, so I'm being very independent when I say that. But if you're not using some of those kinds of tools, you can't see below the surface of the individual or look inside.
All right. Well, let's get back to that here in a second. I just want to finish up talking about, you talk about 4 steps to build the right profile. And you talked about experiences, characteristics, but you said you want to also crowdsource this to some degree too. And I think this is a really important point for managers, is to say, it's not just about what you think, but you talk about making sure you ask other senior management, you ask people in the sales team, you can even ask customers.
Yeah, I think absolutely, one of the recommendations we make for a lot of our clients based on what their issues are is to create a customer advisory council where we meet with 5 to 6 clients at least 3 to 5 times a year. And in those meetings, we discuss everything from marketing strategies, trends within the industry, ideas of what they like in their best salespeople, the salespeople who call on them, what they expect from salespeople. Get some real world utilization of what's working. The second thing that we really push a lot, and depending upon the marketplace that the client is in, is to talk to their fellow business people that they know in their industry. I happen to be up in a client's office today that's in a large distribution channel with resellers all over the world, but all over the U.S. And we really suggest when you're in that kind of environment is to you pick up the phone when you go to a national conference, buttonhole 5, 6 other people who sell similar products and services you are that are non-competitive, and ask them about what they're using, what characteristics are they seeing in their top salespeople, and be able to find out how other people do it. Don't try to reinvent the wheel yourself. Look and find out from other people what they like, what they found to be successful, so you can build that ideal salesperson profile. Yeah,
and I use the word crowdsource. I mean, I think it's there's the wisdom of having more than one input into that. And too often sales managers say, oh yeah, this is what we need. This is what we've hired in the past. We're just going to go down this path again. And that'd be a real mistake. Especially, as you said, given the price is 4 times, I've seen statistics 7 times the cost of the annual salary, what you paid somebody with a mistake in hiring. I mean, you can't really afford to make casual mistakes these days in this process.
Especially with the hard problem of finding salespeople. It's the number one problem in the business today is recruiting effectively, and then more importantly, and we'll talk later about onboarding, but that's a real critical success factor.
Let's dig into that for a second, though. Is one of the issues, perhaps, and one of the problems is that we're looking too narrowly. I mean, when the companies are recruiting, is they're looking just at salespeople. I mean, I work with a lot of companies in the technology field. I encourage them to look at engineers, look at software developers, look at other people that have some expertise that relates to what they do as potential candidates to bring into their sales team.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think the issue that you have to look at is, and from a broad-based audience, what is the product or service you're representing? How complex it is? Who are the type of people you have to try to influence? Is it a CEO sale, or is it a middle manager sale, or is it a production manager kind of sale? And then, so you start to identify your audience and what the people need to know. But then it's important to understand the individuals you're talking to. One of the best salespeople I knew was an accounting major. And he came out of college with an accounting degree. And he was outstanding. Pretty much a pretty quiet person, not the effervescent, glowing salesperson you think about. Highly effective because he understood what the market was, he could communicate well, and he had a drive for success. So I don't have a problem looking out. The second issue that you have to think about, depending upon the size of your organization, can you afford to train that person, to get that person up to speed? Do you have the resources to train that person? And so it's based on the size of the company, resources you have to get that person on board, up to speed, and successful in a time frame that you can afford.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's trade-offs, right? I mean, you can hire a sales professional that maybe has no domain expertise, and you're going to have to train them in domain expertise. You may hire somebody with domain expertise but less sales experience. You might have to support them on the sales side. Yeah, is the ramp up different from one from the other? Yeah, there's a tendency to say, well, it's much longer ramp up if you're trying to teach somebody how to sell. And I'm not sure that's the case. That certainly has not been my experience.
You're right. And that's why in some of the sales assessment tools that are available, and I use a variety based on the need. One I've used that, again, I don't represent it, but they ask this person 50 questions. And they say, out of these 4 answers, what's your number 1 best choice, your number 2 best choice? And they, based upon the knowledge base and experience of the assessment, they can validate whether this person has a chance to be a successful salesperson or not. And so there's ways to do that as well as during the interview process as well.
All right, well, let's talk about the interview process because the assessments are part of that. Because, I think there's value in using assessments, but my experience has been that they're just a data point that you can't rely on them for the sort of the go no-go decision. I know some companies do. They say, well, yeah, this person if they don't score above a certain score on this assessment, then we're screening them out. I understand that. I mean, there's certain time efficiency factor associated with that, but I'm a little leery about that.
It's a sand wedge in your bag. It's one more club that you can use to improve the quality of your decision. So it's not a go or no go issue in my mind at all. Over time, the most important part of the assessment, by the way, is when the person leaves due to not being successful, and you go back and read the assessment a second or third time, and you find out that Ken Thoreson was weak in an area that I missed during the interview. I missed it on the assessment, and every person we've hired is always weak in that area, so it becomes a red flag going forward. So it's one more tool. There are a lot of other ways to deal with that. In the book, we talk about having a case study where it's a sales scenario and you hand it to the salesperson and you say, read this 300-word case study and send me an email back on how you would respond if you were a salesperson. We're testing how creative they are. We're testing how articulate or how well they write, how detailed they may be, or too detailed, not enough detail, and how they would hand it. Those are little ideas that a lot of people don't use.
Well, I think testing is absolutely essential, and more so than ever, given that it seems like it's it seems like it's easier for people to sort of misrepresent themselves these days, even though it's easier to check to see whether they have. But I think it's absolutely critical that if there's some vital skill that you've identified in your job specification, as you described it, or job description that someone needs to have is, as you alluded to earlier, as I talk about, is interview is no place for trust. It's to use the Reagan expression, you're going to maybe trust but verify.
Yeah,
is you have to test. As you talk about, you give people the opportunity to do a presentation. I've been doing that for a long time, and I talk about example and something I've written about. I had a client where looking for a director of sales. One of the things the director of sales needed to do is, it was a relatively small organization, needed to be pretty self-sufficient, but it's also going to be out presenting to clients. So we would have when we did our first screen of candidates and they're coming in for the interview, is in that interview, we would put them in a conference room with a laptop and a data sheet and say, you've got 15 minutes, we're going to come back, give us a short, 2 to 3 minute pitch on this product. And it freaked 90% of the people out.
Yeah, I think it's important. I tell you, if that person can't stand up and be able to dance that well, then depending upon your sale and who you're selling to, what your product and service is, you're going to find a weak link in that area somewhere. And I think that's an important element to have to see how well they can command an audience. Because as a sales manager, you're selling your sales team as much as you may be helping sell a prospect. And so commanding that audience, whoever that audience is a critical element. Normally, I'll do that towards the end where we have 2 candidates left for a sales manager, for an example, or a large executive type sale. And we want that to kind of help be a dividing factor. We also believe in testing in a social environment if your sale requires that. So we'll suggest that the president or maybe the president and a couple salespeople take the candidate out for lunch, breakfast, or socially, and just to see how they interact with each other, how they can command a conversation, how they relax or not relax, and be able to develop rapport.
Yeah, well, this whole topic, and I think for people listening, if you're responsible for hiring, this word test is really critical. And we gave 3 examples of it. You talk about presentation, a case study, socially, I think is another great thing. You have to find out. You're investing all this time and money in this person, in this role. You have to find out whether they can do what you need to have done.
Well, the things I like to say is hire slow, fire fast. But the key issue, if you find an Andy Paul walking through your door, then it's important that you take him through your interview process. You may accelerate that interview process because you want to capture him, but do not miss a step. When you have a sales process, the reason you have a sales process is to ensure you build trust and confidence, you cover the bases, and you have an opportunity to improve your odds to win. You have an interviewing process for the same exact reason. Yeah,
well, and there is a flip side to the interviewing process, which is the buying process on the part of the candidate.
Exactly.
And if you skip steps, it's just like with your customers. When people go through a buying process, they don't skip steps in their buying process. And you're going to have a sort of this disconnect with your candidates if you do that. One thing people always want to know, and you talk about this in your book, are great interview questions. And you talk about questions that measure competence and commitment. Do you have examples of questions that you like to ask that sort of assess either competence or commitment, as you talked about?
Oh, you're going to pick my brain now on those. That's great. Well, there's a lot of them, but one of the questions I like to suggest is that, Andy, we have 2 opportunities. We have an opportunity working with our existing customer base and upgrading and selling those individuals, or we have an opportunity to work a territory, building net new business. Which of those marketplaces do you feel you'd be most competent at? Obviously, I'm trying to test there because I'm looking for somebody net new. If they say I want to work with existing customers, that's a red flag, and I got to go further. Mm-hmm. Number 2, the question I like to ask is, well, Andy, do you have a lot of friends, a lot of good friends, or do you have just a few really good friends? Most hunters, as you use that word, they have very few friends. They are focused, and they also have a loyalty factor there, and they're not the effervescent person who wants to be liked by everybody but can't close anybody. So those are some of the things I kind of probe at. Now, I also talk about, sometimes I'll ask questions about commitment as far as how well and how do they keep up on their competition. Because the people who are really high performers know their competition. They study the competition. They'll know who the competitive salesperson might be. And they'll talk about how they study it and review the websites and understand the associations of the industries and how they stay up to speed. One of the last questions I ask them sometimes are, what was the last good sales book you read? And you'll find that top performers will stay on top of that. And they'll mention your book or they'll mention some other book. And that'll be a way that I also get a sense of whether they're really on top of it. True professionals are always learning. And I think that's an important element.
Yeah, and I ask that same question, but I qualify it a little further. I say, what sales book have you read in the last 30 days?
Good point.
Because if they read it 2 years ago, not as impressive as if they read it 30 days. Because I want to find people that are coming to an organization that, they're reading a book a month. That'd be fine.
Mm-hmm. Now, in my own personal life, I read a fun book, a business book, a fun book, a business book. Like you said, there's been a lot of books coming out this year, and I've been doing book reviews on my blog on a lot of them just to keep people up to date on what I find are really quality books. And I think it's important that you read that. In fact, one of the recommendations I make a lot to our clients, and I just did it this morning here where I am today, is that they start a book club. So twice a year, they buy one book for all their salespeople, and they spend 15 minutes every Monday morning, if that's when they have their sales meeting, discussing 2 chapters in that book. And it's a way for them to really continue to enhance the quality of their salespeople.
Well, one thing, and that's a great thing to do, and I've got some clients that we're going a step further in that we're doing book clubs, but they are basically a book a month. And what the client has committed to do, because this is one of my bugaboos, is, we want people to continually be learning, but we want them to do it on their own time, is they're dedicating 15 minutes a day for people to read.
Oh, wow.
During the workday, 15 minutes.
Wow.
And, they've gone through, this year, 10 books. They're going to actually go through 11, not 12. But, and some pretty, deep books, but all about sales marketing, customer decision-making, so on. And the cost of doing that compared to hiring a trainer to come in for a day, it's less than the cost of hiring a trainer to come in for a day.
And you get the reinforcement opportunity built in, and that's part of where a salesperson said, "Wow, this company is investing in me," and that's part of that belief issue of saying, "Hey, this is a pretty good place to work."
Absolutely, and you just think about just the sheer value compared to a 2-day training session versus being exposed to high quality material over the course of a year at a level of depth. They're going to take away so much more from that than they would from the training. That I'm having a number of clients make that trade-off. So Ken, the last segment of the show, we've got some standard questions to ask all my guests, and actually just a number of sort of rapid-fire questions for you. We'll spare you the hypothetical scenario that you asked the answer at the last time. So, it's ironically, this is a question that sort of came up before. The first one is, in your mind, is it easier to teach a technical non-salesperson how to sell, or to teach a salesperson how to sell a technical product?
Well, since it's a political year, I might say it depends. If you honestly, it's easier if the technical person has the aptitude to teach that person, in my mind, because depending upon the technology and how technical your product is, obviously got to qualify that. Assuming you have a technical complex sale, if that person has the aptitude, you can do that. For an example, early on, I had a person who was working with us. He was a technical person. He wanted to move into sales, and we said, "Okay, we're going to test you, but if you don't make it, you'll be let go. There's not a fallback position in the technical world." Mm-hmm. And while I liked the guy, he had a great relationship. He was perfect for demoing products, and that's why he thought he could sell. But he didn't have the aptitude to go out and talk to people, to work a deal, to ask for the order, to move it through the sales cycle. So I go back to the aptitude and the assessment and the test. Do they have the fire? Do they have the initiative to make that happen? If I have a complex product, it's easier for them to understand it because they come from a background of understanding how the product works, but also what it does for the client. Mm-hmm. And therefore they can relate to the benefits and issues. But if they don't have the initiative to prospect or to think through how to work an opportunity, I would go that way.
Okay. Good answer. So next question. And I guess since you said you do a alternate fun book, business book, so what's one literary book that every salesperson should read?
One literary book. Oh, that's a great question. Wow. I'm trying to think of what. I read The Light Shineth Bar, I think it is. I think that's the name of it. Just finished it this summer. And it's about World War One. And it talks about how these people worked, survived, and had a will to live. And it talked about the will to succeed, the will to live. And that's just off the top of my head. That really struck me, is how these people had to fight, work, and were devastated in many areas, but they survived.
And took place in Europe, then, I take it?
It took place in Europe.
So The Light Shineth. I
think that's what it's called.
I'm looking it up as
I mean, that's a good one. I was just thinking through all the ones I've read in the last year.
So the light shineth in darkness?
That may be it. That might be it, yes. Yes, because the girl was blind. And she was one of the heroines in the book.
Okay. All right. Next question then. So if there's one thing that you could change about your business self, what would it be?
My business self. Patience. In that I tend to like to move things along. I like to be able to execute faster. And I have to wait sometimes for change to occur with my clients because they can't absorb or execute the 25 things they need to fix. And so I think that's part of what I would think about my business self, and that I can walk in after the number of clients I've had, and the number of years in the business and exposure to hundreds of situations, that I can pretty much see 16 things that need to be fixed in the first day. And then we have to plot out a project plan that gives them enough time to absorb, to educate, and to operationalize my recommendations.
Okay, so more patience.
There you go.
All right, so last one is, what's your favorite quotation or words of wisdom that you live by?
That's easy. I have two, but the first one that hit me was, take advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity. Take advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity. And most organizations have about 8. Oh, go ahead.
Well, do we know who that's by?
Or I don't.
Okay.
I picked it up. I was sitting in Puerto Rico in an airport, and an old English gentleman gave that to me as I was talking to a couple other people on my team. He overheard us talking about a sales convention we had down there, and gave me that. And I've used that a lot. And it really happens because most individuals and most companies sometimes have a window of opportunity that might be 18 months long, or it may be 2 days long. And it's funny, I just used that this weekend as I was presiding over a ceremony of 2 people who were moving in together. This gentleman went to a party and saw a particular woman. They were having a scavenger hunt. He picked her out of the lineup. They went on the scavenger hunt, and 6 months later, they built a house together. They're moving in together. He took advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity.
No, I like it. Okay, great. So that was the last question. So Ken, thanks again for being on the show. Tell folks how they can find out more about you.
Oh, thanks. Certainly on my website at acumenmanagement.com. acumenmanagement.com. You can find some free resources. There's a white paper out there on the top 40 actions a sales manager should take. There's some free materials out there and free videos that you can take a look at how to hire, how to interview. There's an assessment tool for your sales compensation plans if you want to look at it out there. Or my blog. It's called Your Sales Management Guru, yoursalesmanagementguru.com.
All right. Ken, thanks again. And remember, friends, thank you for spending part of your day with us. And remember to make it a part of your daily routine every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that, take a minute, subscribe to this podcast, Accelerate. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Ken Thoreson, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.